Thank you all for coming. Tonight we will be holding a public hearing on a privately initiated Metroplan amendment and Whitaker neighborhood plan amendment to change the plan designation on the subject property from light medium industrial to mixed use, with a concurrent zone change from I2 light medium industrial to S-W Whitaker special area zone with a site review overlay zone. My name is Chris Ramey. I'm the chair of the Eugene Planning Commission. To start, I'd like each of the commissioners to introduce themselves.
I'm Commissioner Ken Beeson. Thanks.
Thank you, Ken.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Dan Isaacson.
Thank you, Dan.
I'm Commissioner Tiffany Edwards.
Thank you, Commissioner Edwards.
My name is Commissioner John Borofsky.
Good evening, John.
Commissioner Lisa Fragola. My pronouns are she, her.
Thank you, Commissioner Fragola. Did I get Commissioner Taylor? No.
She will be joining us shortly.
She's muted currently.
I am here. I just had to take a restroom break.
Oh. We just did our introductions, so thank you. Your timing was perfect, just at the right moment. We also have the following city staff with us this evening. We have Rodney Boner, Associate Planner, Gabe Flock, Principal Planner, Lauren Sommer, City Attorney, and Scott Gillespie from Public Works. I'd like to take a moment to explain who the Planning Commission is and our role. We are unpaid volunteers appointed by the City Council to 4-year terms on the commission. This commission often makes recommendations to the City Council based on legislative matters, such as plan amendments and adoption of new land use regulations. We also hear appeals of decisions made by a city hearings official. Tonight's hearing is for an application for a site-specific Metroplan amendment, refinement plan amendment. Oh, I see what's going on here. Okay, let me start that sentence over again. Tonight's hearing is for an application for a site-specific Metroplan amendment, refinement plan amendment, and zone change, which staff will briefly summarize before we begin taking testimony. The Planning Commission's role in this process is to make a recommendation to the City Council on whether to approve with modifications, or deny the application. Some of the terms we have to use are legalistic, and I will try to explain the requirements in plain English as best I can. Since this is a hearing for a site-specific application, there are unique procedures which we are legally required to follow. The decision-making process for this application is considered quasi-judicial. So we will use a quasi-judicial format for the public hearing. Before we begin, the City Code also requires that planning commissioners disclose any conflicts of interest, ex parte contacts, biases, or abstentions. In a quasi-judicial proceeding, the parties are entitled to an impartial or neutral decision maker. To ensure this fair consideration, the Eugene Code and the Planning Commission's rules attempt to limit ex parte contacts or communications between a party and the decision maker outside of the public hearing process. Each planning commissioner must disclose and describe the substance of any communication they have had about this application outside the public process. The planning commissioners must also disclose any conflicts of interest, that is, whether the decision they are about to make could or would result in a personal financial gain or loss for themselves, their relatives, or a business with which the commissioner or the commissioner's relative is associated. Finally, a planning commissioner cannot participate if he or she is biased. That is, for whatever reason, he or she is incapable of making an objective decision on these applications. Do any commissioners have anything to disclose? I do not see any hands up or anyone waving at me frantically. So therefore, I'll move on. The purpose of the hearing is to receive relevant testimony on the applications before us. I want to remind everyone that your testimony should be directed toward the approval criteria that you believe apply to these applications. We ask you to frame your testimony in terms of the applicable approval criteria because the Eugene Code requires that our recommendation be based on the approval criteria. For reference, the applicable approval criteria are listed in the application narrative that was prepared as part of the staff report. Those wishing to speak during the public hearing will be asked to virtually raise your hand. There are different ways to raise your hand depending on how you are participating. For those joining us on a computer, tablet, or other smart device, you can raise your hand by clicking the raise hand icon at the bottom of the screen or by opening the participant window. For those joining by phone, please dial *9, after which you should hear audio confirmation of your hand being raised. If you wish to speak and you have not already raised your virtual hand, please raise your virtual hand now. Historically, once the public hearing is opened, speakers were called in the following order. Those in support, 1, those in support, 2, those with a neutral position, and 3, those opposed. However, due to the limitations of the virtual hearing platform, we have had to make some adjustments. The applicant will be the first to speak. Following the applicant's presentation, testimony will be received in the order that interested parties have requested to speak. As we are unable to fill out requests to speak forms, all interested parties providing testimony will be asked to begin by clearly stating their name, address, and whether they are in support, neutral, or in opposition to the application. The applicant will have the opportunity to present first. Each member of the public giving testimony after that will have at least 3 minutes to speak. We don't have a visual timer, so if you continue to speak beyond your allotted time, we may interject if needed. And at this point, I will ask Vice Chair Beeson to be our timekeeper. And if Commissioner Beeson, if you can just wave if someone's going beyond the 3 minutes, then I will remind them of our 3-minute rule. Thank you. We may interject if needed to let you know your time is up. Once your time is up, your audio may be muted to allow other interested folks to speak. Following testimony, city staff will have the opportunity to respond to the testimony provided and answer any questions that might come up. And finally, the applicant will begin the opportunity for a final rebuttal. I know commissioners have asked for more clarity on when it's appropriate to ask questions, and staff has suggested that if you have questions about someone's testimony, you should ask those questions following that individual's testimony. Following the conclusion of public testimony, staff will have a chance to respond to the public testimony presented, and commissioners will have the opportunity to ask additional questions of staff. I'm also supposed to remind everyone that the failure to raise an issue with sufficient specificity to allow the Planning Commission and parties to respond will preclude future appeals on that issue. In other words, now is your opportunity to raise issues as clearly as you can so that the city and other parties can address them. Just as a reminder, the Planning Commission will not make a final decision on these applications. We will make a recommendation to the City Council, who will hold their own public hearing and allow any new evidence that may be received before making a final decision. Now we will begin with a brief summary from Rodney Bonner about the applications at hand. Rodney, you're up.
All right, thank you. Just a reminder, this meeting is being recorded, and anyone who wishes to access the recording can contact me. My information is on the agenda and staff report. If you'd like to access the recording, I want to thank everyone in advance for their patience too, as we are continuing to work through this virtual platform. So with that said, I will be introducing and discussing the 1400 Cross Street Metroplan Amendment, Refinement Plan Amendment, and Zone Change. Just to start, I want to either inform or remind the public that the staff are assigned to these applications, and our role is to assist the applicant and the public with understanding and applying the code to their proposal, and then working with the decision maker to present a recommendation and to assist with findings or any issues that might arise. So with that said, I would like to introduce the 1400 Cross Street Metroplan project. So the application is for an approximately 4.62 acre development site that consists of 2 tax lots, one pretty large tax lot, which is currently developed with industrial uses, and a smaller lot to the south portion of the development site that is developed with a retail use. Both properties are zoned, are designated as light medium industrial in the Metroplan, as well as the Whitaker Neighborhood Refinement Plan. And their current zoning is I2, which is light medium industrial. The larger lot, tax lot 100, a portion of it does contain a site review overlay. A map helping to show the zoning. Sorry, computer's a little slow. I apologize for the delay. So surrounding the site is a mix of uses. We find, you can see from the map, there's everything from low density residential, which is indicated by R1. R2 is medium, and then we have I2 and I3 to the south. The site is, triangular shape. It's fronted by 3 streets. And then there's also a special Whitaker zoning to the southeast. The applicant is proposing 2 amendments, one to the Metroplan and then one to the Whitaker Neighborhood Refinement Plan. Both plan amendments are currently designate both lots as light medium industrial, and both lots would be going to a mixed use designation. Subsequently, in concurrent with that, they are also seeking approval for a zone change from the I2 light medium industrial and a portion of that with the site review overlay to the entire site being zoned SW Whitaker Special Area Zone, and the entire site would be include the site review overlay. As I mentioned earlier, this application package does consist of 3 separate applications that are being processed together, which is an option available to the applicants. And then when we look at the relationship between the refinement plan, the metro plan, and zoning, the metro plan is our long-term, long-range vision of the city of Eugene and how land will be developed. That plan includes policies and goals, as well as a land use designation map. This proposal is only proposing to amend the Metro Plan map. It is not proposing any changes to the language of the Metro Plan. In addition to the Metro Plan, some neighborhoods in the city of Eugene include a neighborhood refinement plan, which will include additional policies and potentially land use designations. In this case, the applicant is only seeking to amend the land use designation map. They're not seeking to amend any language or policies within the Whitaker Neighborhood Refinement Plan. And then lastly, those 2 plans work to determine appropriate zoning. In this case, the applicant is seeking the special Whitaker with site review overlay. This is just showing a zoom in of the Metro Plan designation map. Again, this is the long range vision for the city of Eugene. Currently, we can see that the proposed site is all light medium industrial designation. And you can see how the designations correspond to the current zoning, which you saw a couple slides ago. So we begin with the highest level, the Metro Plan amendment evaluation. That evaluation seeks to review the proposal for consistency with the statewide planning goals. In Oregon, we have 19 statewide planning goals, and they are they vary widely from ensuring that there's community engagement and community involvement with planning decisions to considerations regarding coastal areas and estuaries. So the staff report goes through each applicable statewide planning goal. After the staff report was made available approximately exactly 7 days ago, we did recognize two issues. The first one I'll discuss is in relation to the Goal 12 transportation planning rule. In this case, after the staff report went out, as we were further reviewing the application and materials, we realized that the proposal, when we evaluate the amount of traffic that would be generated from the current land use permitted on the designation and zoning with the proposed land use designations, we saw on first pass, it looked like you see in table 10 is the no build versus build, or no change versus the approval change. This is going out to the 2035 planning horizon. The no build and build both result in an F level of service. As you can see in the adjoining chart, the level of service, so LOS, consists of a scale ranging from A to F. And this was looking at the time that cars are spent backed up at the intersection. Outside of the downtown Eugene, the acceptable level of service that's been adopted is E at the lowest level. So in this case, the initial review looks like the proposal would maintain the F level, but further inspection indicates that the proposed change will actually increase the amount of traffic and or cause the failure of the intersection sooner than would occur with no change. So given that, that realization, we look at the worst case scenario with the existing zoning. This is provided by the applicant's traffic engineer. And from that study, we see that the worst case development under current zoning in the current designation would be total PM peak hour trips of 453 trips. Given that, we have the ability to apply a trip cap condition of approval. So staff view this as the only condition that we feel certain at making at this point that would ensure that the intersections in question at a minimum remain no worse than the current designations and zoning. So like I said, as shown here in table 3, the peak 453 peak hour trips would make up the trip cap. So any post-approval, any improvements on the site would have to go through, in addition to the standard building permit and site review, potentially. We would also need to look at a trip cap. The proposed condition of approval also includes the ability for the applicant or future owners to revisit the trip cap amount by providing an additional follow-up transportation rule TPR analysis. Additionally, staff received testimony yesterday from the Fair Housing Council of Oregon, and that is in responding to the staff findings in regards to statewide planning goal 10 that relates to housing. In our initial findings, the staff concluded that because the proposal does not include any lands currently designated for residential use in the buildable lands inventory, the proposed designation does not impact the availability of residential lands. In other words, it's not currently designated for residential use, so approving the change from light medium industrial to mixed use would not impact the current availability of residential land. But in further considering the testimony provided, staff are willing to conclude that the statewide planning goal does apply. And in that case, the proposed amendment and zone change would provide an additional opportunity to add approximately 4.6 acres of mixed use land with the ability to develop high-density residential uses per the special Whitaker special area zone. Sorry. Theoretically, this would create additional housing opportunities, which would exceed our housing needs assessment and buildable land inventory assumptions, consistent with Goal 10. The proposed amendment and proposed zone change does not leave the city with less than adequate residential supply in the types, locations, and affordability of ranges that could be affected. That said, the fact remains that the site is currently developed, so it was excluded from both the residential housing needs assessment and employment land buildable lands inventory. The fact remains that it is slated to remain developed, and there's no proposals for redevelopment under review at this time. Moving on to the refinement plan. Again, here we're looking for consistent with the statewide goals. We essentially adopt those from the Metroplan amendment evaluation. We're looking to maintain consistency between the Metroplan, Envision Eugene, which is again our comprehensive plan, and the Whitaker neighborhood plan. Refinement plans are available to applicants for a number of reasons, and one of those is in response to a substantial change since the refinement plan was adopted. In this case, the concurrent Metro plan represents a significant change. So the specific, this site is in the Whitaker neighborhood plan sub-area 9, which is called the Sladen, South Sladen area. Just a little background history here, going back to 1949, the city zoned a continuous strip of land along the Southern Pacific Railroad line for industrial use, as most industrial uses would rely on that rail access, even though at the time, a significant portion of the area was already in residential use. This mix of uses has continued. Later in 1978, the Whitaker refinement plan at that time planned for a mixed use development. The current adopted and applicable Whitaker refinement plan recognizes that the South Sladen area is appropriate for light medium industrial, commercial, and residential uses. As such, most of this area is currently zoned with the Whitaker special area zone. This map is showing the entire expanse of the Whitaker special area zone. So we can see that on this map, you can see the subject site to your left, up to the most west. So it continues this theme of locating the Whitaker special area mixed use along the railroad in close proximity to current residential uses, almost as a buffer. And for these reasons, staff are supportive of the proposal, the proposed refinement plan amendment. Lastly, we look at the proposed zone change. Assuming that the Metro plan and refinement plan are both approved, the proposed zoning would be consistent with those plans. Zone changes also need to satisfy the transportation planning rule, which just, again, we adopt the findings from Goal 10. The site is almost the geographic center of the city, so it's served by urban facilities and services, and it meets the siting requirements, which essentially just require that the refinement plan designates it for mixed use. So for these reasons, staff recommend the Planning Commission approve, and this lays out the language of the recommended condition of approval related to the trip cap. I'll leave this slide up and allow you to read it, but that I'm sure there might be some questions. That concludes my staff report.
Okay, thank you, Rodney. I see Commissioner Taylor, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Rodney. That was a great summary. I just want a little better understanding of where and how this condition of approval will live. So is it sitting as a text? Like, how do you imagine it being? Is it included within the new refinement or the refinement plan text? So how is it going to be administered? is it sitting on the zone change, or excuse me, the zone change? Is it just in the decision? So that would be a great clarification. And some of the reasons why I'm asking that is that it's my understanding, thank you, that at the time of development, there is a site review, that the city may allow development intensity beyond the maximum if demonstrating consistency with the code provision and TPRA or TPR. Is that what I'm curious about is, let's say contextually, the city of Eugene changes. That's why I'm curious to know where the actual trip cap lives. Is it going to be part of the title and sit with the zone? Would that, if for some reason that trip cap became obsolete, can it be modified? So that's really my question, if that makes sense.
Commissioner Chan, that's a great question. This is my first involvement applying a trip cap. So I have my assumptions on how it would be applied, but just so I don't misspeak, I would hand this off to look for any input from senior staff.
Thanks, Rodney. Commissioner Taylor, I would just start with a brief answer that the plan amendment and zone change actually gets implemented by way of an ordinance adopted by City Council. While we don't have a draft ordinance in front of you, we do have essentially the ingredients, right? The findings that address the approval criteria, potential conditions of approval, and whatnot. And we expect to draft that ordinance in consultation with the City Attorney's Office between the point of a recommendation from the Planning Commission on our way up to Council, who then holds a subsequent public hearing and takes action at that point. So it operates as a matter of law by local ordinance, and that's where it sort of lives, so to speak. And then in terms of administering it, it would be addressed at the time of any future land use approvals and or building permits. So it does bring with it a need to track the number of trips, and it would depend on a redevelopment proposal, as Rodney mentioned, that's not before the commission at this point. And so it would be incumbent upon the applicant and then city staff to determine what the additional trips are that are generated from new development, whether it's incremental or whole cloth, a complete redevelopment. They would be subject to compliance with that cap and would need a traffic engineer to essentially provide that estimate based on the ITE manual and all the technical expertise that goes into that.
Vic, can I just one more follow through piece? Thank you. A great explanation. I appreciate it. So it sounds like, even though it's living in these ordinances, so that's law, really where my question lives is, as the city grows 20 years from now, would the owner need to go back and revise ordinances? But it sounds like the condition is crafted enough to add flexibility at the time of development. Let's say they don't develop for 20 years. The condition of approval allows that flexibility to occur, to actually be beyond what's included in that legal ordinance through a TIA. So it sounds like there's an avenue. So thank you. That's great.
All right. I know, commissioners, we will have an opportunity to ask more questions of staff after testimony, and I would like to move on to open the public hearing. I'd like to open the public hearing of the Eugene Planning Commission. If you would like to speak and have not already raised your hand, please raise your virtual hand now. Again, you can raise your hand by clicking the raised hand icon if you're a computer, or dialing *9 if you're joining by phone. We encourage you to submit any written testimony you have as well. City staff will announce the first person to give testimony, which will be the applicant. So the first person to speak tonight will be the applicant or the applicant's representative. And then staff will announce who's next in the speaker's queue. For all participants giving testimony, when it is your turn to speak, staff will unmute you. As a reminder, please begin by stating your full name, your address, and whether you are speaking in support of, neutral, or opposed to this application. So with that, I'm going to ask the staff to turn us on. Get started with our first, I presume this is the applicant or applicant's representative.
It is. We'll have John Schmidt, and I also added Haley Campbell.
Okay. Go ahead, John.
Thank you, commissioners. This is actually Rick Satry. I'm using my associate's Zoom account here tonight. So my name is Rick Satry with the Satry Group. Our office address is 375 West 4th Avenue in the Whitaker neighborhood of Eugene. I'm speaking tonight on behalf of the applicant as the applicant's representative. My comments tonight, testimony tonight is brief. I'd like to begin by thanking staff for their assistance through the process. Metroplan amendments are never easy, but with staff help, they are quite navigable. And I'd like to also say thank you for the staff findings and the conclusion that the applications comply with applicable criteria. I'd also like to say that staff did alert us to the issue of PM peak trips last week, and after discussions with the applicant's transportation engineer and the applicant itself, the applicant is just fine with the proposed condition and the trip cap as worded in the recommended condition of approval. So with that, really, I'd just like to conclude our opening comments and say thank you to staff. And as the applicant's representative, I'm available for any questions that the commission may have this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick.
So next up, we'll have Jennifer Hoover and then Ian Winbrock.
Good evening. Jennifer Hoover at 47 North Polk Street, 97402. And I'm undecided. Can I say that? Because I don't know yet. Thank you. So my question is, and bear with me on this, in layman's terms, can you speak to me of the goal and what prompted this change to occur? What the zone change will cause in a small block? I happen to face the parking lot because I'm on North Polk, right off across in Railroad Boulevard. So I'm there. And how will this affect the traffic? I've got a little bit of it. Noise pollution and the health of people. And will this include a stop sign at the corner of North Polk and Railroad? It's a highly trafficked street, and it's difficult as it is. And can you express to me the highest cons and pros of this change that wants to come about? And I'm asking you to do it in layman's terms because I do not understand the jargon of what you do.
Well, thank you, Ms. Hooper. We will do our best. We may ask staff to address your questions when they respond to others who testify as well. So please hang with us and stay on the phone, and be aware that you can always approach the staff and ask them questions as well.
So next we have Ian Widbrock.
Good evening. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Excellent. Evening, Planning Commission staff. My name is Ian Winbrock, and I'm speaking tonight in support of this application. Just wanted to thank staff for the presentation tonight. I'm a renter in the Whitaker neighborhood at the corner of 5th and Almaden. And while I'm representing myself tonight, I'm an at-large board member of the Whitaker Community Council, a 40-plus-year-old place-based community and economic development nonprofit that also serves as the neighborhood organization for the Whitaker, as well as the co-chair of the Neighborhood Leaders Council, which is the civic organization which represents all 18 neighborhood associations. I have two interrelated comments tonight, and much like Ms. Hoover, I'm not steeped in the arcane world of land use and zoning. So again, I just echo her support for staff as well as commissioners to answer in terminology which is more meant for a lay audience. So my first comment is, what opportunities exist from the staff side to use this project as a use case in the transportation demand management process? There's a focus group happening quite soon that's being implemented by the Transportation Planning Division of Public Works Engineering. I think that it's a rarefied thing to have neighborhoods come out in support of density. So I'd love to see more density in the Whitaker, and I think that this project can really serve as a use case for the type of focus group that TDM is lauded to be by the city. And my second comment is, to my modest knowledge, the first priority of SB 100 is citizen involvement. I'd love to hear from the commissioners and staff how to be able to get more citizen involvement, proactive from the resident side, to be able to increase density, because I really feel that we have an opportunity now through TDM to look at how our land use and transportation planning can be overlaid. And I think this project in particular serves as a very interesting model for other neighborhoods in Eugene beyond the Whitaker.
Well, terrific. Thank you, Mr. Winbrock. So are there any others who are wishing to speak at this time?
We don't have any others, but could I have Ian repeat his address, please?
Sure, it's the corner of 5th Street and Almaden. Or Almaden if you're from California.
I do see one more hand raised in the attendees, Chair.
Yes, I do too. Okay, Amy, are we letting this person in?
Yes, he should be or be able to talk now.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. My name is Fred Tepfer. Since 1979, I've lived at 1380 Bailey Avenue, a couple blocks from the site. Yes?
Could I get your address?
1380 Bailey Avenue, which is a couple blocks from the site. In general, I have vigorously supported density increases and enhancement of the diversity of uses here and elsewhere in Eugene. I do have to say tonight, I'm neutral. I would support it, but I have 2 or 3 serious concerns. I was very pleased to see that staff caught the transportation issue, which was my first concern. I don't think their analysis is complete enough yet to allay those concerns, and here is why. There is often, as Jennifer referred to, there's often severe congestion at the intersections, the 2 intersections that this entire corner of Whitaker uses to access Railroad Boulevard. This is basically our only way out by motor vehicle. Both intersections are compromised by the angles that the intersections are laid out at, one severely and one substantially. For decades, there's been a lineup of cars at Polk and Railroad at AM peak hour in the morning rush hour. And it's gotten quite a bit worse in the last 15 years. Staff did not point out that even in 2012, according to the Eugene Transportation System plan, Railroad Boulevard was already listed as yellow. So that means that it was beyond 80% of capacity. And I'm pretty sure they were counting that as through traffic. The cross traffic trying to access Railroad Boulevard from this neighborhood often waits for more than a minute, which would be a definition of service level F, because these are unsignalized intersections. I suspect that the only solution to this would be to signalize an intersection, which is a major undertaking. It requires a lot of planning and considerable expense. I would like for the Planning Commission and the City Council to be aware of that before they approve this change. I do take issue with the analysis that was presented about the trip cap as a percentage of the current flow, which is already marginal or in failure, it's huge. 453 trips at peak hour is a lot. It seems to be largely the result of one particular use, a convenience store, which we have one of 2 blocks away. So perhaps if we're lucky, that wouldn't happen. My second concern is not really a concern with this project, this proposal. It's a concern more generally that I would like the Planning Commission to be aware of. I would like to read a little quote from the Whitaker plan. Whitaker's mix of business and industrial enterprises close to residential areas is a positive feature that creates an opportunity for nearby employment of neighborhood residents. It also represents a type of incubator environment for small businesses that requires inexpensive facilities, often developed in conjunction with residential uses. We love the mix of uses that we get in Whitaker. And although the SW zone, it seems very similar to the I2 zone, there are substantial differences, some of which were not pointed out in the staff report, some of which were listed incorrectly in the staff report.
Mr. Tepper, you're at your 3-minute.
Okay. Could I have 30 seconds for the third concern, which is very brief?
Wrap it up in
okay.
as soon as you can.
The third concern is very simple. We had a wonderful neighborhood meeting with the applicant. We listed our names and contact information. None of us were contacted in advance through that process. The only people who were contacted were the ones who were within the city notification zone. I would request that the record be kept open for a week so that the neighbors have a little more time to digest this thing, which has been moving rather quickly, so that we can submit additional written testimony. Thank you.
Okay, terrific. Thank you, Mr. Tepper. With that, one last call for testimony from those who wish to speak with us this evening on this issue.
I have no other hands up.
Okay, terrific. So if I'm reading my script right, we are now moving back to staff comments and responses to the testimony. And then we'll have a moment after that for commissioners' questions.
Thank you. So I will try and answer the questions as best I can, starting with Ms. Hoover. She asked, why is this happening and how? So I can only assume why the applicant is seeking this change. It's likely just because of the flexibility of uses that are permitted in the special Whitaker zone. And perhaps they have a future development plan or are looking to sell the property. Whichever the case, perhaps the applicant's representative can elaborate. The traffic, it was evaluated by a traffic engineer. They submitted their plans based on best practices and accepted manuals. That's the best information we have to go on for theoretical future development. The applicant has offered to continue to apply the site review overlay, and they will expand the site review overlay to the entire development site. What that means is that any proposal to expand the existing building by 20% or more, proposal for a new building, or specific changes in uses that might trigger site review would require an additional review, essentially a design review process to ensure compatibility with adjacent uses. That is a type 3 process, type 2, which includes public notice within a certain vicinity of the development site. Through that process, we're going to look at off-site impacts, including traffic, noise, glare, odors. So even without the site review process, our development code includes commercial and industrial development standards, which would still be in effect with the special Whitaker zone. Again, any future changes to install traffic mitigation at intersections. It could be explored through Public Works, but the only requirement we would have of the applicant at this point is that trip cap. Getting to the trip cap issue testimony, again, that worst case scenario is based on allowable uses in a reasonable development pattern that could occur on the site as it's currently zoned. So that's where that trip cap number is based off of. Regarding citizen involvement and quickly moving this through, I just want to clarify that all noticing was done per City of Eugene and state law standards. Notice to interested parties and adjacent property owners was sent on December 24th, and posting on site occurred January 8th. And notice of the proposal was published in the Register Guard. I need a second to pull up when the application timeline, and I'm not sure what specific standards the staff report missed or erred on. I would be curious to see that in the written statement. So that said, I hopefully began to answer some of those questions. I'm happy to turn it over to any other staff that would like to add before we go to the applicant.
Okay.
Thanks, Rodney. I would like to give Scott Gillespie an opportunity to speak, in regards to some of the more technical details that were raised in the testimony. And I would just offer some reassurance to Mr. Tepfer that in addition to the site review application requirements at the time of any future development, our code does require a traffic impact analysis if there are more than 100 peak hour trips generated. And there's I think an important distinction between the TPR analysis and what our local code requires for what we call TIA. The TIA is in fact based on a specific development proposal, an actual square footage, and a specific use, whereas TPR is entirely theoretical based on existing zoning. And so the tool of the trip cap will essentially maintain that status quo in terms of trips that could be generated from the site as it currently sits. The technical matters of where that traffic is distributed, the number of trips in each particular intersection, where they need to be studied, is beyond my expertise, but I'd like to see if Scott can lend any sort of additional detail on that.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Scott Gillespie. Sorry, I'm having a little trouble with my camera this evening. Like Gabe mentioned, with zone changes and Metroplan amendments, what we compare the impacts to traffic-wise is our transportation system plan. So it's all done at a very high level. Our transportation system plan looks at citywide traffic and transportation impacts. It doesn't get down to the specific detail of local streets or local intersections or impact by impact. It really looks at regional mobility, and that's what the TPR is intended to do, is make sure that any amendments are consistent with the performance standards that are set in that document and also the assumptions made in that document. And since there was a failing intersection identified, that's the reason for the trip cap, was to make sure that the traffic was no worse than what would currently be allowed under the current zoning and plan designation.
Okay. So now I'm going to move us on to the applicant's rebuttal, keeping in mind, commissioners, that we will have a chance to ask questions. I think it would be good to get the applicant's rebuttal, and then we can ask our questions after that. That makes sense. So I believe that's consistent with the script.
Good evening.
Take it away.
Good evening, Commissioners. My screen refreshed itself just as I started to speak there, but everybody's back. So on behalf of the applicant, we'd like to reiterate what staff has said in the last few minutes, is that number one, that we are with the trip cap condition of approval, we are in compliance with TPR. As Mr. Gillespie said, TPR looks at regional mobility. We have to remember that the Metro Plan is a regional plan. So we really are working at the regional level in that regard. But more significantly, I'd like to say is that the applicant is proposing that we apply the site review overlay to the entire property. As Mr. Flock pointed out, the site review overlay is a site-specific land use application that gives staff as well as the public and the neighborhood another opportunity through public notice to comment on a specific development proposal that may be submitted at some point in the future. As we all know, in site review, there are a number of very specific standards, including traffic, buffering, screening, noise, light, setbacks, all of those specific site development standards. And as Mr. Flock pointed out, that if it is an intense proposal in the future that might generate 100 or more trips in the PM peak, then the applicant would also be doing a traffic impact analysis. So there are 2 more bites at the apple for staff, the community, and the neighbors to look at a future development proposal. And the applicant is well aware of those and is in support of those requirements. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Satry, thank you. At this point, I'd like to thank everyone who came to testify this evening. As planning commissioners, we find your information very, very helpful, and we want to be sure and encourage you to continue to testify when there are opportunities to do so. And with that, I'm going to close the public hearing on this issue and open it up for planning commissioner questions. I see Commissioner Taylor, yes.
So I just want to, and I know that staff has great follow through, is that a couple of the community members actually asked some good questions. They're outside of this application process. But I would encourage and hope, just in terms of encouraging public involvement, that there could be follow through by the people that testified tonight. If they don't feel like their questions are answered, reach out to staff, because I think there are some good questions, and like I said, they're not necessarily relevant to tonight's hearing. But just being able to understand what and why it's not relevant, and where there might be more opportunity to plug in and be part of a more applicable process. Thank you.
Mr. Borowski.
Thank you. I've got 3 questions. First one is for Rodney. Rodney, in the memos that you sent out earlier this evening, there were 2 memos on the transportation. One of them was labeled MA20-2 and one of them was MA20-3. The MA20-3 referenced a intersection at 5th and Seneca. And I was just curious, that seems like it's well outside the boundary of what this development would impact. Can you tell me why that one was there? It wasn't in the plan that was put together by the transportation planner?
Commissioner Borowski, I'll be happy to take that one. That would be my error in sending out that email and not providing enough guidance, and the fact that MA20-3 is for the next public hearing for the night. And so that's for the next application.
And then secondly, again, on the transportation, if I looked at the no build 2020 or 2035 and build 2035, the intersection in question dropped to level F, either with or without a build. And I'm wondering why this particular zone change in development, if that's going to be triggered by other developments in the area, why is this particular development being penalized or subject to the trip cap when it may not be their fault that that intersection goes from E to F.
So I can take the first stab at answering that. Scott, if you're still there, feel free to add on. I'll probably fumble over this. Essentially, it's a strict interpretation of the OAR regarding the transportation planning rule. Subsection 1, subsection C, criteria C, states that a significant effect is triggered if the requested change degrades the performance of an existing or planned transportation facility that is otherwise projected to not meet the performance standard in the TSP or comprehensive plan. So in that case, this is directly what would happen. Essentially, what's happening is, by your interpretation, if I understand correctly, once it gets to F, the lowest level of service, if it's getting there on its own, why was the applicant penalized with the trip cap? The way we're interpreting that is in response to this trigger, if the proposed change goes through, the types of buildings and uses permitted would theoretically degrade it further than an F if that was such a thing, or earlier. And so for those reasons, and the way the city treats our transportation system plan, public works staff and land use staff agree that it was appropriate to take one of the measures that the state law provides. And in that case, it provides mitigation through a trip cap condition.
Okay, and then my third question will be for Lauren. Lauren, we had a decision in the Whitaker special area earlier this year regarding site review and the applicability of site review that came down and said that it wasn't applicable on a different property. If that decision were used on this property, could the site review be removed?
So Commissioner Borowski, I think you're referring to one of the Simons properties, the zone change application. If you'll recall, actually, when it went up to the Court of Appeals, the Court of Appeals did determine that the site review overlay was placed on the property and remained on the property even after the LUCU land use code update in 2001. In this case, the circumstances are a little bit different than that situation, even because the applicant is requesting the site review overlay be applied to the property, and that was not the case in Simons.
Thank you for that verification.
Commissioner Isaacson.
Yeah, I just want to remind that we essentially kind of just said that we would go back and at least have staff, I believe it was Ms. Hoover, who asked for a layman's discussion about what this would do. And I wanted to make sure we honored that and offer the staff the ability to go back and do that if we're going to.
I can take a stab. The outcome is really difficult to determine here, which, kind of bled over into how we address the statewide planning goals. The Whitaker special area is really unique in the city in that it's one of the most actual mixed use zones available. And it essentially permits, with particular developments, its own set of development standards, essentially relies on the use tables provided in either the I2, light medium industrial, C2, community commercial, or R4, high density residential. That said, there are some specific uses that are different, and development standards related to that. There are some uses that are excluded. So it's difficult to predict exactly what could happen here. It could retain its existing site as primarily light industrial and storage with a retail outlet. It could develop some high density affordable units. I think history tends to repeat itself. So if you look at the example set by the other, currently zoned areas, especially that are adjacent to this site, which will share similar characteristics, you have, I believe it's the Square One Villages to one side. You have uses like Thinking Tree, Spirits, and so it's hard to predict, but the attachment of the site review will provide if that's retained, to provide a future ability to review an actual specific development proposal. As we mentioned, this is just a change to the designation in the long-term Metro Plan, the Whitaker Plan, and a proposed zone change. So there's no specific development that we're reviewing at this time. I can assure you that I don't know of any secret plans, but assuming that if this goes through, we would have the opportunity to review those based on a number of criteria. Ideally, the goal of this zone is to permit walkable neighborhoods that are, have a lot of vitality and the ability to provide employment and living space in close proximity. It considers the compatibility with adjacent residential uses by putting a height cap on development of 45 feet. So I think it's a great zone, and I hope that if we're able to address all the concerns raised today, I think the Planning Commission would agree that it might make sense here.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure if that meets Ms. Hoover's exact request, and I would encourage her and others to contact the city staff if they'd like any more detail on that one, because it requires more than what we can probably do in the context of our meeting this evening. And I'm sorry that our work is that way. Frankly, I'm constantly sorry that our work is that way, but that's the nature of what we're doing. So Commissioner Edwards, you would like to ask a question, or yes?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I have a quick question. I was just maybe hoping that maybe staff Rodney could bring some information for our deliberations. Maybe I'm just curious to know, you mentioned the mitigation that was available, which is where the trip cap came from. I'm just curious if there are other considerations that have been proposed or considered. And I'd be curious just to know what other options staff has thought through, and if there are any other solutions out there that might be a potential potential ideas that this commission could consider. If that makes sense.
Sure. Scott's welcome to chime in. The condition that we've recommended is just based on the fact that we don't have an actual development proposal in front of us. So we can't propose a specific physical mitigation, adding a turning lane or limiting turning out of the site, because currently there's no proposal to change the site. So it would be, somewhat inappropriate to require a theoretical worst case scenario and then try to mitigate that. What the trip cap does is gets in front of it. It recognizes, well, even if we didn't do anything today and Planning Commission denied the proposal, these are uses that are still feasible. What the applicant is proposing is a mix of uses. It's a large site that could accommodate a mix of uses, and those are totally proposed. Off the bat, I don't think any of them would require a conditional use permit. Depending on where they are located on the site, there could be a site review triggered, but the proposals include manufacturing, an office/laboratory use, a printing shop, all uses permitted in the I2 zone. That, at a certain level, they propose a 3-story building as well. That's only the total build out, and their hypothetical proposal only covers 40% of the site, leaving 60% for landscaping and parking. Given all of that consideration, really the only option we have at this time that wouldn't face immediate challenge from the applicant and be unfair to them is the trip cap. And it's an option that the state law explicitly provides, and we're taking advantage of in this case.
So that actually was one of my questions, and I'm sorry, I only saw the transportation information, this afternoon before this meeting, but I think you answered part of it. The applicant made an assumption about how the site would be developed, including square feet, and took those square footages and multiplied them by factors that are found in the engineer's book of magic and said that's how many trips there are going to be generated by that use. So am I correct in assuming we're relying on the applicant's estimate as to how the site is going to be developed?
We reviewed the applicant's proposal. We did provide completeness review comments on that, and they provided supplemental information. But yeah, the applicant, the study is provided by a licensed engineer, so their license is on the line.
Let me put it, if to game the system, couldn't you say the site would be developed by a very low impact transportation and then your cap? Well, I guess you want to do the other way around. You want to have a very high one, so you could set your cap high. Isn't that right? I mean,
you could call it gaming the system, or it's essentially a theoretical exercise to determine the reasonable worst case scenario. So, it's important. Reasonable.
So what I'm asking then is be sure that you all as staff test that question of reasonable, because I don't think I'm capable of doing that. So
and I could probably help out with that a little bit too.
Before we deliberate.
When we go through these exercises of preparing these big elaborate traffic studies, one of the first things we do is we scope out the traffic study. So the assumptions that are made for these reasonable worst case scenarios are run by staff. So Rodney and Gabe and his team can make sure that the uses are appropriate and consistent with the proposed zoning, and they're also consistent with the plan designations that are existing and proposed. If we don't feel that it's intense enough, like you said, then we're rather insistent that change. So when we mean by reasonable, we really do mean reasonable, and there is some back and forth to make sure that that's been checked and that it's appropriate.
Okay, so at this point, your judgment is that it's reasonable what they've listed.
Yes. When Rodney and I went through it, I usually rely on the planners to make sure that uses and densities are appropriate. That's their expertise. And my expertise is usually on the heavy duty math end. So it's we have to take a look at it to make sure that's reasonable. And yes, we both agree on it.
I have two more things. One of them is very dumb and one less dumb, I think. So typically we get the applicant package. I'm used to getting that as part of the agenda. And I didn't this time. Where can I find that?
I'm happy to email it to you or any other commissioners, but it's currently the entire record for this application is available on the online land use database that we provide. So all of the record is on there. There's multiple links in the memo that went out today in the previous EIS.
So I should use that link to find the okay, perfect. And then my last question is sort of back to my newness to land use planning and planning 101. The idea that you put uses in places that make sense, so you don't put incompatible uses next to each other or whatever the criteria is. That's why we do land use planning, so we don't end up with things next to each other that aren't compatible. And in this instance, because it's mixed use and because mixed use is prevalent in the neighborhood, it almost sounds like that sort of common sense thing doesn't apply here, because we're going to do, this could all be housing or it could all be commercial. So the range of uses that are allowed in mixed use is quite broad. So it kind of defeats the idea of this land use thing that I would have told my children when they were young. Having said all that, what I'm concerned about is, are there mechanisms within the development process that assure that the land is not somehow hazardous? And so we haven't somehow stumbled into allowing housing on a hazardous place or near a noisy place. Are there other mechanisms within the development code that deal with those issues?
I'm not aware of any triggers or mechanisms in the land use code. That's not to say that there aren't state laws, EPA laws, brownfield sites and things like that. I don't have expertise in that, so anybody else's background experience, I can't think of anything in the land use code which is specific to
Well,
it's in front of us today.
I would support that. I'm not aware of any local regulations, but that we do obviously have the State Department of Environmental Quality and at a federal level, the EPA, but it would be incumbent upon the applicant to address any hazardous material abatement or the like in order to get certified to be able to do residential development in the event that there is hazardous waste that was found.
So it's not a land use issue per se.
Correct.
Okay. Commissioner, I'm sorry, Lawrence Summers, you had your hand up earlier and then your hand went down. And so I know Commissioner Taylor, you're waiting patiently. You're down now. Okay, Commissioner Taylor.
Thank you. I just want to reiterate, and I'm going to ask the question, even though I know the answer is, it responds to Commissioner Ramey's question, because I think it's important that the community understand transportation planning rule is, it's mandated by the state. So there are criteria. So it's not arbitrary. So you have a licensed engineer that's providing information and then reviewed by staff. So I just want to, Scott identified that as well as some of the other staff, but there is associated criteria with that, which is part of the application.
Oh, I had read the application. I'd know the answer. Very good.
I just wanted to add one point about the community involvement. I stumbled over that earlier, and now I just lost my page again. But the initial neighborhood meeting was sent out to affected parties within a certain distance of the development site, as well as the Whitaker neighborhood community group. That meeting occurred back in January 23rd, 2020. So this process has been over a year since that initial neighborhood applicant meeting occurred. So I just wanted to add, just for time frame context.
Thank you. Mr. Fregula.
Are we only listening to testimony and information tonight, or are we also deliberating?
I would defer to staff on this, but I can tell by the time that we have used on this hearing that we will not be deliberating this evening.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just jump in and add that we did have a request to hold the record open, and Lauren, if you want to jump in here and help. I think we are obligated under statute to do what we would typically, in the event of that request, we're obligated to set aside a minimum of 7 days for testimony for anyone, and then a 7-day response period related to that first period, right? A response to that additional testimony, and then the applicant gets a final written argument or rebuttal, no new evidence. So it looks to me, I don't have a calendar right in front of me, but we'll want to follow up and actually reschedule the date for deliberations sometime after where it's at now on, I think, February 8th. So we won't have time for the open record period. We will want to have all of that material, be able to produce that and provide that to you as sort of a stopping point for your deliberations before you enter into that deliberation process.
Okay, so I see Lauren Summers nodding her head, so that must mean that's all correct. So we'll have to, in other words, do we need to take positive action on leaving the record open? Because it's been requested, it's...
State statute requires us to leave the record open upon request because this is the initial evidentiary hearing in this particular set of applications. It's unusual for Planning Commission to do the initial evidentiary hearing, but in this case you are. Gabe is correct that our default, and it is clearly legal under state statute, is a 777 open record period. So the first 7 days, anyone can submit any information, including new evidence. The second 7 days, anyone can respond to the evidence that was submitted in the first 7. And then the third 7 is just for the applicant to submit their final arguments, no new evidence, as Gabe pointed out. I was looking at a calendar and it looked to me like we could say the first open record period goes through 5 p.m. February 2nd. The second period would be 5 p.m. February 9th. The third would be 5 p.m. February 16th. And so you would certainly need to reschedule your deliberations because they are currently scheduled for February 8th, I think.
Got it.
And, you know, Commissioner Ramey, it wouldn't, although we are required to leave the record open, it would not be a bad idea to have a motion from the Planning Commission for that specific set of open record periods that I've just articulated, if Planning Commission is willing.
Okay, so if Planning Commission is willing, meaning someone needs to make the motion.
So moved.
So moved by Commissioner Fragola. The record will be held open until the 2nd of February, and with rebuttal for rebuttal for everybody until the 9th. Final close on the 16th. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor, show me your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7-0. Thank you all, commissioners.
So just for the public watching, if you have questions about what this open record period means, please email or call me. Just to reiterate that anyone can submit any new arguments or evidence up till 5 p.m. on February 2nd. That will close the open record, that period. From February 2nd through February 9th, staff will accept arguments in response to the testimony and arguments presented. That second period will close at 5 p.m. on February 9th. And then the applicant has 7 days to reply since they have the burden of proof, and they would need to respond by February 16th at 5 p.m. Testimony can be submitted ideally through email. My email is provided on the AIS. If you have questions about what to submit or the implications of the change, you're welcome to call or email me. We can set up a time to chat. You can submit materials through the mail, but you will need to make sure that those are received by those cutoff dates. If none of those options are available, we can arrange a drop-off here at the Atrium building to take a written statement in person if that's the last resort. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ronnie. I think that was very, very helpful and very clear. Thank you. So with that, I believe next thing I'm doing is moving on to the second hearing. I see everyone agreeing to that. Good evening again. Now we will be holding our second public hearing of the night for another privately initiated Metroplan amendment and zone change. The Central Eugene Industrial Park application proposes to change the plan designation on the subject property from heavy industrial to light medium industrial with a concurrent zone change from I3 heavy industrial to I2 light medium industrial. Again, my name is Chris Ramey. I'm the chair of the Eugene Planning Commission. We have already introduced ourselves and covered a lot of procedures for the first hearing. So for the sake of time, this will be an abbreviated version, but some statements I will reiterate as required, and for anyone who is just joining us now. To start, I'd like each of the commissioners to introduce themselves.
I'm Commissioner Ken Beeson.
Commissioner Tiffany Edwards.
Commissioner Kristen Taylor.
Commissioner John Borowski.
I'm Commissioner Lisa Fragola. My pronouns are she, her.
I don't know if we got Commissioner Isaacson. You may have overlapped with someone.
Yeah, Commissioner Dan Isaacson. I did overlap with Commissioner Borowski.
Thank you. I'm trying to be very efficient. Thank you. Tonight, we also have the following city staff present. Jeff Gepper, Senior Planner, Gabe Flock, Principal Planner, Lauren Summers, City Attorney, and Scott Gillespie, Public Works. I'd like to take a moment to explain who the Planning Commission is and our role. We are unpaid volunteers appointed by the City Council and often make recommendations to City Council for land use applications such as these plan amendments. The Planning Commission's role in this process is to make a recommendation to the Eugene City Council on whether to approve with modifications, or deny the application. The decision-making process for this application is also quasi-judicial. As before, the Eugene Code requires that planning commissioners disclose any conflicts of interest ex parte contacts, biases, or abstentions in a quasi-judicial proceeding, the parties are entitled to an impartial or neutral decision maker. To ensure this fair consideration, the Eugene Code and Planning Commission's rules attempt to limit ex parte contacts or communications between a party and the decision maker outside of the public hearing process. Each planning commissioner must disclose and describe the substance of any communication they have had about this application outside the public process. The planning commissioners must also disclose any conflicts of interest, that is, whether the decision they are about to make could or would result in a personal financial gain or loss for themselves, their relatives, or a business, or which the commissioner or the commissioner's relative is associated. Finally, a planning commissioner cannot participate if he or she is biased. That is, for whatever reason, he or she is incapable of making an objective decision on those applications. Do any commissioners have anything to disclose? Okay, I don't see any hands up or frantic waves. Does anyone in the audience or a member of the commission wish to challenge the impartiality of any of the planning commissioners? The purpose of the hearing is to receive relevant testimony on the applications before us. Your testimony should be directed toward the approval criteria that you believe apply to these applications. For reference, the applicable approval criteria are listed in the application narrative that was prepared as part of the staff report. Those wishing to speak during the public hearing will be asked to virtually raise your hand. For those joining us on a computer, tablet, or other smart device, you can raise your hand by clicking the raise hand icon at the bottom of the screen or by opening the participant window. For those joining by phone, please dial *9, after which you should hear audio confirmation of your hand being raised. If you wish to speak and you have not already raised your virtual hand, please raise your virtual hand now. Traditionally, once the public hearing is opened, speakers were called on in a specific order. However, due to the limitations of the virtual hearing platform, we have had to make some adjustments. The applicant will be first to speak. Then testimony will be received in the order that interested parties have requested to speak. All interested parties providing testimony will be asked to begin by clearly stating their name, their address, and whether they are in support, neutral, or in opposition to the application. Each member of the public giving testimony after that will have at least 3 minutes to speak. And Vice Chair Beeson will be monitoring the time and letting me know how that's going. Thank you, Commissioner Beeson. Following public testimony, staff will have the opportunity to respond to the testimony provided and answer any questions that might come up. Finally, the applicant will be given the opportunity for a final rebuttal. Failure to raise an issue with sufficient specificity to allow the Planning Commission and parties to respond will preclude further appeals on that issue. In other words, now is your opportunity to raise issues as clearly as you can so that the city and other parties can address them. Again, the Planning Commission will not make a final decision on these applications. We will make a recommendation to the City Council, who will hold their own public hearing and allow any new evidence that may be received before making a final decision. Now we will begin with the staff presentation, a brief summary from Jeff Gepper about the applications at hand. Thank you, Jeff.
Good evening, commissioners. As a reminder, my name is Jeff Gepper, Senior Planner with the Planning Division. We are in for a very similar conversation as to the last public hearing that we just held. So I'm going to be a bit brief on some things, and we can follow up with questions on some of those if you guys have further questions on those topics. So today we're talking about a Metroplan amendment and zone change for the Central Eugene Industrial Park. This is application files MA 20-3 and Z 20-10. And let's get that moving. So we're talking about 4 different properties who technically have 4 different owners. So there's one property here that's bisected by the railroad here, and then a railroad spur. Actually, it's not part of the formal railroad, which is up over in this area right there. And then we've got a large parcel, which is partially developed over on this side, and then 2 developed parcels on the bottom. And we're pretty much in the heart of a heavy industrial zoned area, which is unsurprising given the Metroplan designation, which you'll see in a little bit, which is primarily heavy industrial. And they're proposing to change the Metroplan diagram from heavy industrial to light medium industrial, which would facilitate their desired zone change from I3 heavy industrial to I2 light medium. The applicant states in their materials that the reason they want to go through this zone change is to basically broaden the allowable uses on the subject property. Really, the applicant provided a pretty nice table that identified the uses and how they change. It expands it greatly in terms of the allowable uses for manufacturing and those sorts of activities. And really, it doesn't lose out on that many heavy industrial uses, really just conditional explosive manufacturing, homeless shelters that were existing prior to, I think it was like 1989, but homeless shelters are still allowed. They're just allowed through a conditional use permit. And then it doesn't allow scrapyards or large recycling facilities. So really, thinking about it in terms of what can be there, they're just looking for a greater allowance in uses for the sites. Here we can see, as I said, for the Metroplan, it's all designated as heavy industrial at this time, and they're looking at changing to light medium industrial, which you can see on the north and the south of where these properties are. As Rodney discussed in the previous public hearing, we're guided by kind of a tiered system of policy that informs one another. So the Metroplan, which is our high-level regional document, refinement plans kind of narrow that focus into the specific areas throughout town, which then informs the final zoning, which defines allowed uses and what can go on the sites. In this case, the refinement plans, just to get this out of the way, it's the Bethel-Danabo Phase 2 refinement plan, which is included the West Eugene industrial lands study, but there's no land use diagram like you would see in the Whitaker area or in the Willikenzie area plan like we saw with the Shepherd Motors application a while back. The other one is the West Eugene wetlands plan, which is again, doesn't have a land use diagram. So that's why in this case, whereas in the previous application, we saw that they had to do a refinement plan amendment. We don't have that in this application because it's not necessary for consistency. There's no conflict that we're creating by going through this change. So again, like I said, this is not necessary. I probably could have gone to this slide a little earlier. So thinking about the actual evaluation for each of these applications, similar to Rodney's, for the Metroplan amendment portion, there's the 19 statewide planning goals, but the 2 that are most relevant to this application were the Goal 9 economic development section and then the Goal 12. Goal 12 I'll get into a little bit later. That is in the same situation as with the previous application we discussed. Goal 9, in this case, it's almost a belt and suspenders for not being applicable. And that's because it's one of those cases where they're going from industrial to industrial. And the way that our employment land supply study looks at industrial properties, they put all those designations into one bucket. So for them to transfer from industrial to industrial actually has no net change. So in that way, they're not impacting the OARs associated with Goal 9. Also, when the BLI was performed, or when the employment land supply study was performed and they looked at these sites, due to some of the thresholds we had set for analyzing kind of how sites were determined to be developed, they actually triggered being developed, even though, as you likely saw in the aerials on that, some of those sites are partially developed, if not nearly vacant. So again, because they were considered developed, they also weren't calculated into the employment land supply. So here, really looking at a difference from the application we just talked about in the Whitaker, and also different from the Shepherd Motors property earlier this year. The goal 12, like I said, I'm going to touch on that a little bit later. We don't find that there's any inconsistencies created with this process, and it is consistent with the Envision Eugene comprehensive plan. Like I said, there's no refinement plans necessary for this. In terms of the zone change itself, if the Metroplan amendment is approved, it will therefore be consistent with the zone change will be consistent with that, with the Metroplan. The applicable refinement plans don't have any policies that could be seen as mandatory approval criteria. So, but generally they're supportive of this type of development. It's in an industrial area. Looking at the transportation planning rule, again, I'll get into that. It's entirely within a developed area in kind of the industrial lands portion of West Eugene. As summarized in my findings, it has access to all the key urban facilities as defined under the Metroplan, and it meets the siting requirements for the I-2 zone. Now I'm going to get into the transportation planning rule. As previously discussed, the transportation planning rule essentially looks at what the future implications are for the proposed change. And so you look at it in the terms of what's happening now, what's happening later if there is no change, and then what would happen if there is the change that's being proposed. And you can see here on this table, they talk about that. And we use level of service, which is kind of like a report card for looking at the delay that occurs at intersections. And just like in the last application, we have a situation in which we have an intersection that is operating at level E currently, at level of service E. And what that means is, are the performance measures for the city set at our bottom bar is E. You have to be operating at E. But when it goes to 2035, it begins to fail and moves into category F. And that's not caused by this development, that's just caused by growth overall. But with the zone change and with the plan amendment, we see that the zone, there would be added trips according to the transportation planning analysis provided by the applicant. And those added trips will add further delay onto the service and therefore further degrade that transportation facility, that intersection at 5th and Seneca that was mentioned before. So because of this, and this was found late in the process, and I really appreciate the applicant working with us to kind of come up with this, work with us to accept an elegant and simple solution, which is the trip cap condition. So once again, we are going with the trip cap condition, especially given that we don't know exactly what the future uses will be. And the trip cap condition is based on 438 trips, which is what is projected if this site were to be max built out. And you might think, Rodney or the previous application had only a couple acres of land, and yet it was creating just as many trips as this. And we have almost 41 acres here. But true industrial development is not as big of a trip generator as say a special use zone that allows a large range of mixed uses, including retail. So working with the applicant, we came up with 3 kind of manufacturing and sales combinations that kind of created a general reasonable outcome for how these sites would be developed. And so that resulted in that trip cap of 438. So based on all those factors, we're in exactly the same situation as the last application, where we are recommending approval of the Metroplan amendment and the zone change, but we are recommending approval or providing that recommendation to you with the condition for a trip cap of 438 PM peak hour trips. This same trip cap allows the option of going through a type 2 land use process to, if they ever want to exceed that 438 trips. And they have to essentially demonstrate consistency with the transportation planning rule that we're kind of giving them an out on right now. So with that, I will conclude my presentation and hand it back to you, Commissioner.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. Anyone have any questions for Jeff before we move on to the hearing? Yes, Commissioner Taylor.
Thank you. I actually, I don't have any questions, Jeff. That was a great summary. I do want to jump in because, and I'm sorry I didn't jump in earlier during full disclosure. It's because this is a property. I do have a client that, just in full disclosure, that we worked on, we're not currently working on, that is located on the west side of Seneca, just north of the intersection of Seneca and Fifth. So it's essentially right across the street from one of the parcels that is included in the Metroplan refinement plan zone change, or Metroplan zone change application. And we are still working with that client. So I just, in full disclosure, I've never visited the site. I don't view there being a conflict of interest. I don't have any bias. This information is new. Like I said, I have never been to my client's site even.
Lauren Summers.
You, Commissioner Amy, Commissioner Taylor, I just want to clarify that what I think I heard you say was you're putting out that information in the interest of transparency based on what I heard you say. The business for whom you work has a client who owns a piece of property that is located nearby to this piece of property, but neither you nor the business with which you're associated have any financial interest in this piece of property or this zone change, Metroplan change application. Is that a correct summary?
That is wonderful. Yes, it's a very accurate summary.
There's no need for you to declare a conflict of interest because you don't have one. And I heard you say that you haven't visited this site, so you're also not declaring an ex parte conflict. It's just, or contract rather. It's just you being transparent about having a client that owns a property near to the site.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. With that, I'd like to open the public hearing of the Eugene Planning Commission. If you would like to speak and have not already raised your hand, please do so now. Raise your virtual hand now. Again, you can raise your hand by clicking the raise hand icon if you're on a computer, or if dialing in, you can dial *9 if you're joining by phone. We will start with the applicant, then the city will announce the next speaker and who's up in the speaker's queue. As a reminder, please begin by stating your full name, address, and whether you are in support of, neutral toward, or opposed to this application. So I believe we are ready now for the applicant to speak.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, my name is Teresa Bisho. I'm a land use consultant working on behalf of the applicant. Address is P.O. Box 50721, Eugene 97405. Bill Close is the land use attorney on this application, and Cindy Schaefer is online. She's been the property manager for the last 10 years and has firsthand knowledge of the challenges of recruiting businesses with the limited range of uses allowed in the I-2 zone. Prior to submitting the application, we looked closely at all of the employment industrial zones. We looked at a couple of the commercial zones, and we even considered creating a new special mixed-use zone. But ultimately, we decided the I-2 zone was really the best fit for the to blend and fit in and be compatible with the surrounding land uses and the plan designations in the area. At the pre-application meeting, I do want to point out Sean Hyland, president of John Hyland Construction, Karen Hislop, Walter Nelson, John Scanlon, the Bimart real estate manager, Casey Alstrom with Zippo Log, and Eric Hall with Eric Hall Architects were all involved and expressed support for the application, and were in general eager to see the property develop in a positive way. We were encouraged and appreciate the city staff findings and recommendation of approval that went out with the agenda. And we appreciated the rapid response when they decided that there was a concern regarding compliance with the TPR. We've carefully reviewed the recommended condition of approval, and we support this remedy for how to be able to expeditiously move forward with the application. And in closing, I will say that approval or recommending approval of this application really helps to address City Council goals regarding economic development and bringing jobs to our community, as well as goals supporting compact growth. Ultimately, ideally, the city designs and constructs the needed signal at 5th and Seneca. This project could occur using SDC transportation fees, and hopefully the city won't wait for a particular individual development to occur, but will take the initiative and get the project done. This site is at the center, physical geographic center of Eugene, and we hope you will recommend approval. Thank you again for your time. And that concludes our presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Bishop. Commissioner Taylor, do you have a question?
I just would love a clarification, Teresa. I think it's pretty obvious, but because we're on camera or being listened to, is that you said the manager has direct experience in the challenges with I2 uses. I think you meant with I3 uses, so I just wanted to make sure.
Yes, thank you for clarifying that. It's the I3 zone has a fairly limited range of industrial uses. And with changes in market conditions and different types of businesses looking to locate in Eugene or expand, it's been very challenging to manage and lease the property.
Okay, thank you. Do we have anyone else who wishes to speak during the hearing?
I don't have any other hands up.
No other hands up. Okay. Do we have any staff comments on what they heard? No. Okay. So therefore, we can move in. I don't believe we have an applicant. We don't have a need for an applicant final rebuttal, but I will make that offer. I don't see why we would.
We have no further comments.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Teresa. So with that, I'm going to close the public hearing. And that also closes the record, if I'm right about this, Lauren Summers.
Yes, Chair, I think you can close the record, although I know that sometimes in the past the commission has done that by motion. I think either is fine.
Either is fine. Well, I don't want to go against tradition, so could we have a motion to close the record?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Moved by Taylor, seconded by Fregala. All those in favor, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Very good. 7-0. Thank you all. I believe that with a little bit of a lack of drama is the end of our meeting. Then we closed the hearing. We have questions from commissioners at this point. Okay, thank you, John. Commissioner Borowski.
Thank you. Couple of questions. One, if I ask for information from staff, would that be part of a record in deliberation?
Commissioner Borowski, depends a little bit on the type of information you're requesting. So if it's something that's already been submitted into the record, or if it's the law of the city, if you're talking about code or a portion of the refinement plan or a metro plan, that's all fine. New evidence at this point is not allowed because you just closed the record.
Okay, well, I'll let you staff figure this out. So my question has to go with the availability of I-3 property in the city of Eugene. We're taking 41 acres out of I-3. I would like to know how much I-3 zone property there is available in the city. And if that's new information, I might want to change my vote on the record. And the reason I'm asking that is that I-3 or heavy industrial is placed in certain areas of the city for a reason. And if we're displacing 41 acres of I-3 in this area, for me, I would like to know the environmental justice impacts of that. If this area is not I-3 and somebody else wants a 40-acre industrial use that's next to housing or other areas that would be more impactful, I would like to know what those impact, if there's enough I-3, because in goal 9, it's all lumped together. And I understand that that's not an applicable criteria, but for me, just as a planning commissioner and seeing where things may go, it would be helpful for me in making the decision on this to know if there's more I-3 lands available. We just got done doing an urban growth boundary expansion for industrial lands, and many of those were not zoned I-3. So that would be some information that would help me in my deliberations.
Thanks, Commissioner Borowski. I will look into whether or not that material is already included in some of the records or is within materials that are available for me to enter in without violating anything that Lauren spoke about earlier.
I'll just jump in here and say that based on my recollection of the materials, what you're asking for is outside the scope of what's in the record. I'm not sure where in the context of the criteria that information would affect the commission's decision. But to be able to provide such a broad brush analysis would be difficult in short order. And so, I'm concerned about, in this instance, opening the record for that specific request if it's not directly relevant to the approval criteria.
Okay, that's fine.
Any other questions from commissioners? Okay, so if I'm right about this, we will be able to deliberate at our February 8th meeting and take action at that meeting if we see so fit. Is that correct? So we're still up for that. Okay.
That is correct. And I do note that we have about 10 minutes left. I'm not sure, just maybe taking the temperature here to see if the commission's ready to act tonight. It would have to occur rather quickly. But we obviously have the date set aside for the 8th for more thorough deliberations if need be.
Okay.
I just want to point out that we actually don't put an end time on public hearing nights. So because we can't control how much time folks speaking. So they start at 5:30 and we don't put an end time. So you could choose to deliberate tonight instead of coming back on the 8th.
Okay.
Or you can come back on the 8th. Just to clarify.
Very clever. All right. Commissioner Borowski.
I make a motion that we deliberate and take action this evening.
A second.
Moved by Borowski, seconded by Taylor. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. So let's move forward. do we have materials in front of us? Do we know what it is we're deliberating on? Can staff point us to those?
Would it be helpful for me to share my screen with the presentation materials again, or what can I do best to serve you in this situation?
I'm thinking of don't we have to agree with the findings?
That's, you would.
Well, we have to recommend to the council that, oh, okay.
And so those findings were provided in the agenda packet for this item.
Yeah, that's correct, as part of attachment D, so.
So the recommendation is something along the lines of recommending the city council that the proposed amendments and zone changes be approved in accordance with the findings of second consider date, something like that. Yes, Gabe.
Yes, I think you're on the right track. The one, I think, caveat is that we would want to have the motion direct staff to incorporate the recommended condition of approval that was provided to you in the memo. So in other words, if through deliberations there's agreement to recommend the trip cap condition and the findings that led to that in your memo, we will simply blend that with the other document under goal 12. So with that direction, we feel comfortable, unless there are changes or concerns about it, to be able to take that action on your behalf as we move forward to council.
Okay, I see Commissioner Beeson with his hand up.
Yeah, I think, we had all the material we needed provided to us in the findings. We had in the staff backgrounder or the additional material, we had the recommendation. I thought everything was pretty straightforward. And I think what I've heard from staff and what we had in the material and in the findings is that this proposed zone change and kind of the related changes with the Metroplan and so on were all met all the criteria and were consistent with all the applicable criteria for various plans. So I'd be ready to, subject to having more discussion, but I'd be ready to put a motion out there that we recommend to the council the approval and as Gabe said, I guess consistent with what the staff has in the written material for the recommendation.
Okay, terrific. Commissioner Taylor.
I will second that motion, if that's truly a motion.
It was a motion.
It was.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would just with the clarification that, as Gabe said, that basically based on the availability and evidence and the preceding findings of compliance with the applicable approval criteria. That's what I heard, Commissioner Beeson, that we're going to incorporate the condition of approval and the findings in the memorandum that's dated January 26, 2021 from Jeff Gepper. And it is in relation to MA 20-3, Z 20-10.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I've moved and the seconded motion here. Is there any discussion on that motion? Commissioner Borowski, your hand was up briefly.
Yeah, I'm in support of the motion with what was stated in the public testimony on how this will help piece of property developed for economic development that is very difficult to site things on now. I think that anything we can do as a planning commission to help our economy and get things going in appropriate venues and parts of town is absolutely appropriate. So I will be in favor of this motion.
Any further discussion? Okay, last chance. All right, with that, I'm going to call for the question on the motion in front of us. All those in favor, show of hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Terrific. All right, so that, I believe, does an extra bonus, gets through our business and more at 7:24. This is kind of a scary moment. Yeah, exactly.
Does that mean our meeting on the 8th will not be happening?
I believe that is the outcome, yes.
Yes, so we will cancel the meeting on the 8th. We will see you again on Monday, though, the 1st. Yeah.
The planning commission is feast or famine
It really is, isn't it?
A month or so, nothing, and then 5 meetings in a week.
It's a little like being a soccer goalkeeper, you know, it's 2 minutes of hell and 58 minutes of boredom. You're only playing 60 minutes, I guess. The 90-minute game, that's even worse. All right, so with that being said, I believe our work is done, and we'll see you all the next time we see you all. Enjoy your evenings.